Hey everyone, uh, this is a piece by Amadeo Bordiga, uh, titled Lessons of Counter-Revolutions, uh, Section 1, Summary. There's a footnote here. The text is part of Bordiga's report to party's general meeting in Naples on the 1st of September 1951, first published in Bollettino Interno del Partito Comunista Internazionalista, I don't know if I'm saying that right, 10th of September 1951, and republished as a booklet, Lezioni delle Controrivoluzioni, by Edizioni Il Programma Comunista in May 1981. The excerpts translated here are pages 9 to 12 and 29 to 41 of the booklet. This is from the Passion and Science of Communism book that came out, I guess, a year ago, probably. Very recently. A collection of Bordiga's writings. Anyway, Section 1, Summary. For Marxism, there are no, quote, surprises of history, end quote. 1. Neither the advent of forms of dictatorship of capital, nor the dissolution of the international communist movement, nor the complete degeneration of the Russian Revolution are, quote, surprises of history, end quote, requiring a modification of Marxism's classical theoretical line to explain them. Proppers up and patchers up of Marxism. 2. The head-on deniers of Marxism as a theory of history are to be preferred to its proppers up and patchers up, who are even worse if their language is not collaborationist but extremist, for whom critical variants and complements are needed to correct its failures and its powerlessness. We are clearly in a period of social and political counter-revolution, but at the same time of full critical confirmation and victory. Russian counter-revolution and proletarian strategy. 3. An analysis of the counter-revolution in Russia and its reduction to formulas is not a central problem for the strategy of the proletarian movement in the renewal that awaits it, since the counter-revolution in Russia was by no means the first one, and Marxism has known and studied an entire series. Moreover, opportunism and the betrayal of the revolutionary strategy have of course, different from the involution of the Russian economic forms. Counter-revolution. 4. Not only the study of past bourgeois counter-revolutions, but also that of feudal counter-revolutions at the expense of the insurgent bourgeoisie, led to different historical types, military and social total defeat. German Peasant War of 1525, military total defeat but social victory, defeat of France in 1815 by the European coalition. Military victory, but reabsorption and degeneration of the social bases. Destruction of Italian capitalism despite the Commune's victory over the feudal empire at the Battle of Legnano. Footnote. At Legnano, near Milan, on the 29th of May, 1176, the troops of the League of the Lombard Communes defeated the King of Germany and Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa. End footnote. The Russian economy, quote, tends toward and, quote, aims at capitalism. 5. To classify the type of Russian counter-revolution, in which of course no invasion and military defeat by capitalist powers was involved, it is necessary to examine the economic fabric and its evolution, which in a double sense, quote, tends toward and, quote, aims at capitalism. Feudalism, capitalism, socialism. Pardon me, there's a footnote here. In Italian, quote, tende, end quote, signifies both, quote, tend toward, and, quote, aim at. Bordiga, in fact, says, quote, in a double sense, end quote. The two distinct senses become clear in point 59 below. End footnote. Feudalism, capitalism, socialism. 6. To do so, it is necessary to reestablish Marxist elementary concepts. A. The definition of feudalism as an economy of small producers with non-mercantile exchange. B. The definition of capitalism as a mass production economy with totally mercantile exchange. C. The definition of socialism as a mass production economy with non-mercantile distribution, an economy with rationing, but that is already non-monetary at its lower stage, while at its higher stage it is limited. It is unlimited, while at a higher stage it is unlimited. The aim of the proletarian struggle. 7. Class struggle at the capitalist stage. A struggle not for the simple reduction of the quantum of surplus value, but for the conquest and social control of the entire product, of which the individual worker was violently expropriated. The working class struggles to conquer everything that today constitutes the wealth and value of the means of production and of the total mass of commodities. It struggles to conquer constant capital, which is the heritage of the labor of past generations, which has been usurped by the bourgeoisie, variable capital, which is the labor of the present generations, most of it exploited by the bourgeoisie, the surplus value that must be reserved for future generations, to conserve and extend the means of production, today monopolized by the bourgeoisie, while all three factors are continually squandered by the anarchy of capitalism. State capitalism. 8. State capitalism not only is not a form that is new and of transition to socialism, but, indeed, is pure capitalism. State capitalism appeared, with all its forms of monopoly, in the period of the bourgeois victory over the feudal powers, while the state-capital relation forms the basis of the bourgeois economy in all its phases. One and only one type of capitalism. 9. The Marxist vision of history would fail if, instead of recognizing one and only one type of capitalist production, as of every other previous type of production, that runs from one revolution to the next, it were to admit a succession of different types. Double revolutions. 10. Like the German Revolution of 1848, the Russian Revolution was supposed to be the integral whole of two revolutions, anti-feudal and anti-bourgeois. The German Revolution, in its political and armed struggle, failed to achieve either goal, but socially the anti-feudal goal of transition to capitalist forms prevailed. The Russian Revolution was politically and militarily victorious on both fronts and therefore more advanced, but economically and socially it did not advance at all, falling back on the goal of capitalist industrialization of the territory it controlled. The post-revolutionary course of the Russian economy. 11. After the great political victory, few sectors of socialist economy took hold, and Lenin, with the new economic policy, was forced to sacrifice them for the sake of international revolution. With Stalinism, it was the international revolution that was sacrificed, intensifying the transition to large-scale industrialism in Russia and also in Asia. Proletarian elements on one side, feudal elements on the other, both tending towards capitalism. This is what results from an analysis of the Soviet economy based on the criteria premised here. The Third World War and its Marxist evaluation. (12) The prospect of a Third World War is not a central problem of the new revolutionary movement, since the two anti-fascist, crusadisms, are converging, the West in a democratic sense, the East in a counterfeit proletarian sense, with small forces, nuclei, of the revolutionary proletariat, the sworn enemy of both. The situation during the war will be counter-revolutionary, just as it will be for a certain period in the alternative case of an agreement between Russia and the Atlantic powers on economic and territorial bases. The method of the colonial infeudation of the defeated country will ensure a counter-revolutionary balance in the post-war period, to the extent that the imperialism better equipped and of greater historical continuity prevails. Therefore, just as the worst possible outcome of the First World War was the English victory, and of the second, the Anglo-American victory, so of the third, the worst would be an American victory. ... Section 2. Distinctions between feudalism, capitalism, and socialism. 45. After our discussion of the precise terms of the passage from pre-capitalism to capitalism, we must now specify the characteristics that distinguish the capitalist economy from post-capitalism. For at least a century, for us, post-capitalism has not been, quote, a pig in a poke, end quote, but rather something very precisely defined. According to the general rule, we can see around us actual examples of post-capitalist economy, just as there was large-scale manufacturing centuries before the bourgeois revolution. We quote here a passage from another text. Footnote. The text is a letter from Alpha Bordiga to Honorato Damen on the 31st of July, 1951. Damen was an exponent of the Italian communist left who broke with Bordiga in 1952. On the reasons for this break, see Damen 2011. End footnote. Quote, as we've said on other occasions, there is even more. There are true communist types even under capitalist power. Firefighting is one example. When something burns, nobody pays to put out the fire. If nothing burns, the firefighters are fed all the same. I say all this to combat the thesis, whoever be its author, that schematizes as successive stages private capitalism, state capitalism as the first form of lower socialism, higher socialism, and communism. State capitalism is not semi-socialism, it is full-fledged capitalism. The Marxist theory of concentration tells us that it is in fact the outlet of capitalism. What is more, it is the condemnation of the liberalist theory of a permanent regime of production, in which the marvelous play of competition never fails to put a brand new slice of capital within everybody's reach. To distinguish between capitalism and socialism, the title to the possession of the instruments of production is not sufficient. It is necessary to consider the entire economic phenomenon, that is, who has the product at his disposal and who consumes it. Pre-capitalism. Economy of individual producers. The product is the independent workers. Each consumes what he has produced. But at the same time, subtractions of surplus production and therefore of surplus labor are perpetrated at the expense of the multitude of individual workers, at times united by forces into masses, but without the modern division of labor, by privileged caste orders and powers. Capitalism. Associated labor, in Marx, social labor, division of labor, with the product at the disposal of the capitalist and not of the worker who receives money and buys on the market what he needs to keep up his strength. The entire mass of products passes through the monetary form in its voyage from production to consumption. Lower socialism. The worker receives from the unitary economic and social organization a fixed quantity of products that are necessary for his life and can have no more. Money comes to an end, replaced by consumer goods that cannot be accumulated, neither can their destination be changed. The voucher? Yes, lower socialism is the labor time voucher for everyone without the use of money and without markets. Higher socialism or communism. In all sectors, one aims to abolish the voucher, and everyone takes what they need. Some will go to the cinema 100 days in a row, ? They can do it even today. They'll call the firemen after setting fire to their own house, ? They do it today, but back then there was no fire insurance. In any event, both then and now, mental hospital services are in keeping with the pure communist economy. They are free and unlimited. Recapitulating. Pre-capitalism. Economy of individual producers without money or with the complementary employment of money. Capitalism. Economy with the totalitarian employment of money. Social production. Lower socialism. Economy without money and with vouchers. Social production. Higher socialism or communism. Economy without money or vouchers. Social production. State capitalism. It would be idiocy to call it state socialism, is completely within capitalism. Give me 1 second if you don't mind. A lot of people have been bitching about the quality of my videos. And it's like, dude, like, no one listens to this shit. And I don't think if it was better, like, if it was better quality, people would suddenly be flocking to the videos. It's like, folks is just babies. Like, I hear things moving around. You should edit this. It's like, I am not spending any more time doing these things than I already do. It's just you can bear with me through my moving things around and my stuttering and stammering and mispronunciations, or you can just read the goddamn things yourselves. That sounds bitter, doesn't it? Sorry, I had to save that. Okay, section 3. The counter-revolution in Russia. Counter-revolution in Russian social events. We return to all these basic notions to explain the course of the current counter-revolutionary process of which the social events in Russia are a part. Such events cannot be examined unless they are seen as part of a whole. If analyzed separately, they lead the incautious to adulterate the Marxist doctrine, that is, to admit new analyses and new perspectives due to the intervention of a third class, of a third factor. In this way, footnote, namely the bureaucracy, end footnote. In this way, they fall into the trap of the Stalinian trick that posits permanent functions for a state that is no longer an instrument of class, but a generator a generator of class, and abandon the notion of the emptying of the state. The Marxist method of work always hammers home points already known. 47. Our method of work always leads us to hammer home points already known and to extend our investigation to ever broader and more diversified sectors within the perimeter fixed by these points, but never to proceed to innovations or inventions. Competition and monopoly are complementary notions. 48. Competition and monopoly are not rival, but rather complementary notions also in the market and in exchange, with the former, competition, developing into monopoly. It is on the monopoly front that the bourgeois class asserts itself, the monopoly of the means of production and of products. The historical development of the trade union movement and the bourgeois reaction. 49. The workers, to react to the social condition imposed on them by capitalism, and which is fostered by their lack of unity, go on to institute a monopoly of their labor power by means of trade unions. Consequently, capitalism must reveal its nature, found trust, and assign its state not only police but also economic functions. Prior to the unions, there were mutual aid societies that collected contributions from the workers but did not yet demand higher wages from the capitalists. Nothing could have been more conservative. Yet in the traditional mutual aid associations and even in the charitable congregations, the Socialist Party made useful inroads. Economy and politics after the revolution in Russia. 50. The formulation contained in our draft manifesto regarding the Russian economy that, quote, tends towards and aims at capitalism, end quote, needed to be clarified. What took place in Russia? What took place was precisely the reversal of the first communist characteristics of the economy, the overturning of internal and international policy, with the latter not ineluctably having to proceed from the former. The Russian post-revolutionary economic crisis. 51. In 1921, when Russia was completely isolated due to the failure of revolutionary victories in other countries to materialize, the level of its productive forces dropped to a limit below the minimum. It was no longer possible to supply the city with products from the countryside and vice versa, as had first occurred under war communism, with the proletarian state being short of the products of the city and of the countryside alike. It was necessary to legalize free commerce, which until then had been reserved for black marketeers or, quote, speculators, end quote. The NEP. 52. Lenin and the Bolshevik Party instituted the new economic policy in an economic ensemble that included forms of nomadic, patriarchal, feudal, and bourgeois production along with small units of socialist economy. Asked whether the new economic policy was capitalism, Lenin's answer was a categorical, quote, yes. And it could not have been otherwise, since from the moment in which wages are paid in money, and with this money you buy food, you have capitalism. This does not change the nature of the state, which, because it can do so, remains proletarian. Thus, its nature results not from the structure of the economy, but rather from the position of class and of force in the development of the revolutionary struggle of the international proletariat. Lenin's anti-NEP measures in the political sphere. 53. Lenin, who in the economic sphere went so far as to consider permitting foreign private capital to enter Russia with the concession of entire territories, signaled the need to beef up state power to cope with the social relations caused by the measures implemented by the NEP and to play for time, hoping for help from proletarian revolutions in the West. In Russia, reversal in the political sphere, the cause of retreats in the economic sphere. '54. This is how the problem has had to be posed. Trotskyism proclaims the intervention of a third factor, namely the bureaucracy. For us, the current situation in Russia presents nothing original, since capitalism is not distinguished by ownership of property, but rather by the impossibility, realized through the force of the state, for the working class to take possession of the products and by the payment of wages in money. The economic developments that have led to the current situation in which private individuals lend to the state is itself an entrepreneur, the public debt swells, private possessions of residencies is permitted, houses are assigned to specialized workers. These developments are not due to the social maneuver of the new economic policy, but to the reversal that has taken place in the political sphere and in the international position of the Russian state. The new economic policy left the state to the proletarian class that in fact already possessed it. Retreats in the economic sphere by no means necessarily implied errors of revolutionary tactics and strategies at first, followed by the overturning of the position of the state. German and Russian double revolution. 55. Socialism could not be built in Russia alone, where in fact in February and October of 1917 the bourgeois and the proletarian revolutions joined forces. Also in Germany in 1848 a double bourgeois and proletarian revolution was attempted unsuccessfully. The bourgeois revolution was victorious in the economic and social sphere after the bourgeois-proletarian alliance had been defeated in the political sphere. In Russia, after the double political and social victory of 1917, came the proletarian social defeat, datable to 1928. What remained was the capitalist social victory. The enterprise is the essential factor of the current world capitalist phase. 56. We do not have at our disposal documentary material for a detailed examination of the Russian economy, but the indicators we do have permit us to make a reliable assessment. We see the essential factor of the current world capitalist phase to be the enterprise. The construction enterprise is an emblematic example that works without a stable location or installation or equipment of its own, with minimal capital but for maximum profit, and can do so because it puts the state at its service, and the state provides it with capital and covers its losses. The bureaucracy has a mediating function. '57. The functionary is not a central figure, but is simply a mediator. Lined up against the corps of state functionaries is the corps of counter-officials of the enterprises, swarming with consultants of all sorts intent on bending the state to the interests of their enterprises. In its outer forms and with very different names, we find an analogous mechanism in the USSR. The fact that the Moscow enterprises were able to give the city its underground as a gift says it all about the sky-high profits they reap in all their other activities. State capitalism. And this capitalism in Russia presents us with absolutely nothing that is unprecedented. The fact of state management directly connects it with 100 other cases in the course of history. Take the example of the Italian communes, where, moreover, we find the first form of state investment for industrial production, private enterprise did not have sufficient capital for the building of ships, so the communes provided it. Remember, it was states and kings that equipped the first fleets and founded the imperial companies, seeds of the capitalist explosion, and now we have the recent example of British nationalizations. The Russian economy, quote, tends, end quote, toward, and, quote, aims, end quote, at capitalism. '59. The Russian economy's tending toward capitalism thus has a double sense. The first socialist and communist forms following the October Revolution degenerated, regressed, and were reabsorbed. The proletarian economy degenerated for a number of years, then degenerated definitively and disappeared, giving rise to mercantile and capitalist forms. But in the meantime, the entire vast sphere of the pre-capitalist Asiatic feudal Russian economy was powerfully tending toward, bracket, aiming at, end bracket, capitalism. And this tendency is positive, bracket, is an aim, end bracket, and in its turn is a premise of the world socialist revolution. Lenin and Trotsky themselves saw this necessity and were the pioneers of electrification, the only means of bringing production into line with the West, better to defeat imperialism. Stalin reversed the revolutionary international plan, but gave a huge boost to industrialization in the cities and the countryside. It must be said that this was an irresistible fact of the Russian social situation after the fall of the crumbling czarist and boyar structure. Lenin glimpsed the possibility for his party to be the carrier of the proletarian political revolution throughout the world and, in the meantime, also of the capitalist social revolution in Russia. Only with victories on both fronts could Russia become economically socialist. Stalin says that his party implements economic socialism in only one country, Russia. In fact, his state and party has been reduced to being the carrier of the only capitalist social revolution in Russia and Asia. Nevertheless, over the heads of individual men, these historical forces work for the world socialist revolution. Our evaluation of the Chinese Revolution is no different. In China, too, workers and peasants have struggled for a bourgeois revolution in various phases, and they can go no farther. The alliance of the four elements, workers, peasants, intellectuals, and industrialists, produces the alliances fully in line with Marxism in doctrine and in tactics. In France in 1789 and Germany 1848. Nevertheless, the destruction of the age-old Oriental feudal structure will be an accelerator of the world proletarian revolution on the condition that it spreads to the European and American metropolises. Current Marxism habitually focuses on the question of who is the personal profiteer and the consumer of capitalist exploitation, forgetting that Marx insisted again and again on the soul of capital and the depersonalization of the capitalist, for whom the accumulation of surplus value counts more than his individual wallet and, indeed, the life of his very children. In light of this, it is not sufficient to describe the beneficiaries of the fruit of Russian capitalism. As we said, what counts is not the fruit but the entire plant, as, quote, crypto entrepreneurs, end quote, and, quote, crypto profiteers, end quote. For us, they are not functionaries of the Soviet bureaucracy, but rather a separate stratum. A bureaucrat in Russia is the simple mechanic in a factory, as he is in England today, all, quote, civil servants. Note that curtain or no curtain, this mechanism, or more precisely, this network for the channeling of wealth, communicates with the network of world capital. The foreign trade of the Soviet state is itself nothing other than a huge pair of scales. that never weighs equivalence but continually cheats the masses of Soviet workers. Then there is the enormous impasse of the monetary maneuvers that rebound between the legal and illegal markets of Asia and Africa. There are, quote, rents and loans, end quote, still waiting to be settled. After all, the rent and loan of millions of proletarian Russian corpses to defeat Germany was considered by the Americans a far better deal, economically speaking, than the production of the correspondent quantity of atomic bombs. In Russia today, coexistence and emulation, yesterday's blatant alliance with its pact to dismantle the communist parties of the West, and the full participation in the blocks of anti-fascist liberation are, on the one hand, the confirmation of a political overturning to the point of counter-revolution. On the other, they are the economic market lots and premiums cashed by world capital at the expense of the supreme effort and the very life of the Russian worker. Hence, as party, power, and state, the degeneration is no longer in progress, but is an accomplished historical fact, and Trotsky's widow saw it very well for herself. Footnote. Natalia Sedova, Trotsky's widow, disassociated herself after World War II from the official position of the Trotskyite movement on the nature of the Russian state, seen as a worker state that has degenerated due to its fundamentally counter-revolutionary political leadership, but that still has a socialist economic base thanks to its nationalization of the means of production. This is, what was I going to say? I have two things on the YouTube channel. One from Natalia Sedova, Benjamin Pere, and Grandizio Muniz as a letter of critique against the holding on to the degenerated worker state thesis by the Fourth International on the YouTube channel. And I also have Max Shachtman's comment on Natalia Sedova Trotsky and Muniz and Pere's statements on the subject. So there's a couple of resources on here if you're interested. Also, for that matter, in the Christos Memos book, Castoriadis and Critical Theory, that I have on the channel, there's also commentary about Natalia Trotsky departing from the degenerated worker state thesis. And I'm kind of, if you're curious about what I'm doing with my life, I'm kind of in like a historical studies master's program, and I'm kind of was originally starting to think about writing about the Castoriadis in his Socialisme ou Barbarie period, but I'm kind of like thinking about generally like the intellectual climate of critical Marxism in the immediate post-war period. So like people like, I don't know, the third camp Trotskyists and Bordigists and Trotskyists who break with the Fourth International, Raya Doniyevskaya, CLR James, Castoriadis IV, and also I haven't really done much research on this, but I'll probably need to do some research into Tony Cliff, who was who also broke with the degenerated worker state thesis, but held on to Trotskyism and Leninism in general, whereas Castoriadis and Doniyevskaya and CLR James, even if ambiguously kind of sort of moved away from that conception of revolutionary politics. Obviously, Castoriadis and I don't know if C.L.R. James ever stopped. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, sorry for rambling on, I have a YouTube video on the channel from a long time ago from a guy named Matthew Quest on the ambiguities and ambivalences, or I think what a better word might be, contradictions in C.L.R. James's conception of Lenin's role in the disempowering of workers' power in the early period of the Soviet Union. It's kind of like a councilist or anarchist critique of C.L.R. James. I don't really know what Matthew Quest identifies with, but he's definitely a scholar of C.L.R. James. He's written other things about him, I'm pretty sure. I think he wrote something on C.L.R. James and his contradictory relationship to Maoism and so on. But enough of my yak. Section 4. The lesson of counter-revolution. Spartacus, the Christians, and the fall of slave society. 60. The defeat of Spartacus at the foot of Vesuvius spelled all at once the political and social defeat of the slaves, with the social regime of slavery remaining in power. But the victory of Diocletian's subsequent repression of the Christians, who were genuine political and class conspirators, led not to a consolidation of the slave regime, but the triumph of the new religion, the social fall of that regime, and subsequently the advent of medieval feudalism. Understanding the counter-revolution to prepare the revolution. 61. When we are asked why Engels, after the defeat of the revolution of 1848, decided to write The Peasant War in Germany and study the peasant defeat of 1525, we realize that it is necessary to understand the counter-revolution in order to prepare the revolution of tomorrow. This is what we need to do today, not to isolate a sector or a problem, but to fit it into the context of the whole. Thus the bourgeoisie of the 19th century extolled its many and unforgotten past defeats in the act of building its definitive victory. Thus also the proletariat, that, as Marx says in The Class Struggle in France, 1848 to 1850, not victory, but a series of defeats, quote, qualify for its world triumph. Thanks to its class party, will be victorious by presenting itself anew as it was at the beginning of its struggle, and in the programmatic, lapidary formulas, unsurpassed because unsurpassable, of the Communist Manifesto. Meanwhile, it is right to profess and to defend the Marxist doctrine of history as an alternation of social classes, each made up of an ensemble of men whose position is parallel to the forces and systems of production, since it can be demonstrated that every social class in its entire historical course had a continuous task and program ever since its first achievements and battles. Thus, Christ's vindication of the enslaved multitudes links up with the fall of the Roman Empire and of classical society. Thus, the first demands for civil and peasant liberty link up with the storming of the Bastille and bourgeois revolution throughout the world, and the banner waved is always the same. And thus, the modern proletariat, the first to free itself from the fideistic and idealist formulations of its own aspirations, has all the more reason to be seen as a genuine historical force in the Marxist sense. This proletariat cannot fail to be victorious, since it is clear that, just arisen from the new order of productive forces, it mapped out its historical objective and road, however hard, that takes it there. A road that requires struggle against the manias of neo-Marxisms and of the, quote, new analyses, end quote. There are no, quote, new classes, just as there are no, quote, new types of capitalism. The fact that we have been defeated, that therefore we are in a counter-revolutionary period, tells us why there are few of us and also why confusions arise among us. This, however, does not induce us to adulterate the theory of revolutionary Marxism by admitting that a third protagonist has come on the scene of society, a new class. We have no need to discover new types, new stages, no need to invent powers new to state capitalism, as we said, presents us with nothing original, and was itself the first form through which the capitalist class asserted itself for the very first time in the epoch of the communes in the year 1100. Schema of Marxist centralism. 63. In support of the exposition we have developed, and to repeat the timely warning of the left regarding the degeneration of proletarian politics, we attach a schema representing the relations between the working class, the economic associations, the class political party, and the central party organs. The explanations added show that the two formulations, laborist and Stalinist, concordant in the formula of the mass party, stem from the same base in that economic determinants are replaced by determinants of the will of individuals, but both ultimately lead to the same result, namely, the imposition on the individual of decisions made by the top party leadership. One and only one perspective of the international proletarian revolution. 64. A point that has given rise to some doubt and hesitation. What is our perspective? As always, it is one and only one. The international proletarian revolution, when the conditions for it will have been realized. But today almost all these conditions are remote possibilities. As regards the current prospects, as we see it, three hypotheses present themselves: the peaceful takeover of Russia by America, or a war between the USSR and the USA, with the victory of the one or of the other. First, Second, Third World War. 65. Already in the case of the First Imperialist War, the victory of the strongest capitalist sector, England, which for 200 years had not been defeated and has never been invaded, inevitably created the least favorable conditions for the revolutionary attack of the international proletariat. A military defeat of that sector could have given rise to a less unfavorable course. The same must be said for the Second Imperialist War, which ended with the victory of the London-New York Axis, and for the third, we do not hesitate to affirm that a victory of the United States would represent the most sinister of eventualities. It is true that we lack class forces with which to intervene in these formidable events, and it is also true that we must maintain our autonomy with respect to these two equally anti-revolutionary powers, and fight the two, quote, crusadisms, end quote, to the end. But, finally, it is true that we cannot deviate from the only evaluation that is in keeping with the Marxist doctrine. The fall of the center of capitalism entails the fall of the entire system, while the world bourgeois system can survive the fall of the weakest sector. given the modern method of military and state destruction of the defeated country and its reduction to passive colonialism. And it is precisely on this political line that capitalism can be prevented from absorbing the reactions to the policy of Stalinism that manifest themselves within the proletariat, so that these energies can be organized in the new organism that will be founded on the principles of revolutionary Marxism, once again becoming the active force of history. It says central schema of Marxist centralism. And there's a pyramid drawn here. At the top of the pyramid, it says central party organs. Below that, class political party. Below that, economic associations. Below that, at the bottom of the pyramid, social class. 1. The individuals that compose the class are driven to act in discordant directions. Some of them, if consulted and free to decide, would act in the interests of the opposing ruling class. 2. The trade union organizations tend to act in a direction contrary to the interests of the capitalists, but in an immediate sense and without the capacity to converge on one and only one action and one and only one aim. 3. The militants in the political party, as a result of their work within the class and within the associations, are prepared to direct their action according to one and only one revolutionary line. 4. The organs of party leadership stemming from the base act in the revolutionary direction, consistent with party theory, organization, and tactical methods. Sorry, I'm looking at something real quick. The position of the left consists in the simultaneous struggle against the two deviations. 1. The base suffices to decide the action of the center, if it is democratically consulted. Workerism, laborism, social democratism. 2. The supreme center, political committee or party head, suffices to decide the action of the party and of the masses. Stalinism, commonformism, with the right to discover, quote, new forms and, quote, new courses. Footnote. Commonform, Communist Information Bureau, was founded in 1947 on the initiative of Stalin's Russia to ensure the exchange of information between the Stalinist parties of the various European countries. Though its true purpose was to provide the countries of Moscow's sphere of influence with a unitary structure capable of confronting U.S. policy based on the Marshall Plan. It was dissolved in 1956. End footnote. Both deviations lead to the same result. The base is no longer the proletarian class, but rather the people or the nation. Marx and Lenin are perfectly right. The result is a line of action that moves in the direction of the interests of the bourgeois ruling class. Thanks for listening.